Hey everybody, Ronnie here. In the year 2020, the world witnessed a series of unprecedented events that shaped the course of history. It all began on January 1st with one of the worst fire seasons in Australian history. Thousands of people were forced to evacuate and millions of acres of land were consumed by the devastating wildfires. It was all leaving behind a trail of destruction and loss. 2 days later, on January 3rd, tensions escalated in the Middle East when Iranian General Qasem Soleimani, leader of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps' Quds Force, was killed in a U.S. airstrike in Iraq. The incident raised fears of further instability in the region. Then on January 7th, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, the CDC, issued a travel notice for Americans traveling to Wuhan, China. The Chinese authorities had reported a cluster of pneumonia cases associated with a seafood and poultry market in Wuhan on December 31st, 2019. Little did the world know that this would mark the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic. Just a day later, on January 8th, tragedy struck in Iran when the country's military shot down Ukraine International Airlines Flight 752 shortly after takeoff from Tehran. All 176 people on board lost their lives in the devastating incident. Moving on to January 8th, also saw some notable changes in the British royal family as Prince Harry and Meghan Markle announced their decision to step back from royal duties. This sent shockwaves through the monarchy and captivated the public's attention. On January 11th, Puerto Rico was struck by a series of powerful earthquakes, adding further woes to an already challenging year for the island nation. As the world was grappling with these events, the U.S. presidential race was in full swing. On January 14th, Democratic presidential candidates gathered in Des Moines, Iowa for the first debate of 2020, setting the stage for a contentious election year. The political landscape was further stirred on January 15th when the U.S. House voted to send articles of impeachment against President Trump to the U.S. Senate. The trial would later result in Trump's acquittal on both charges of abuse of power and obstruction of justice, marking a significant moment in American history. Meanwhile, a silent threat was making its way across the globe. On January 20th, the first case of COVID-19 was reported in the United States, signaling the beginning of a pandemic that would change the world's way of life. January 26th brought a devastating helicopter crash near Calabasas, California. The crash claimed the lives of NBA star Kobe Bryant, his 13-year-old daughter Gianna, and 7 others, leaving the world in mourning. In the midst of uncertainty and sorrow, there were glimmers of hope and success. On the same day, January 26th, young music sensation Billie Eilish made history at the Grammys by sweeping the top 4 categories and solidifying her place in the music industry. January 29th saw President Trump establishing the White House Coronavirus Task Force to address the growing pandemic. Additionally, he signed the United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement, the USMCA, marking a significant trade deal for North America. On January 30th, the World Health Organization declared the coronavirus outbreak to be a public health emergency, alerting the world to the severity of the situation. January 31st brought about 2 significant events. The United Kingdom officially withdrew from the European Union, making Brexit a reality. Simultaneously, President Trump announced a ban on travel from China, except for a few exceptions, as a measure to control the spread of COVID-19. As the first month of 2020 came to an end, the world faced numerous challenges, both global and individual. But amidst the chaos and turmoil, humanity showed resilience, strength, and compassion, standing together to face uncertainties that lay ahead. The roller coaster of events continued in February, from triumphant victories to heart-wrenching tragedies. It all started on February 2nd, when the Kansas City Chiefs emerged victorious in the Super Bowl, defeating the San Francisco 49ers in an exhilarating match. The next day, on February 3rd, chaos unfolded during the Iowa Democratic caucuses. The race was marred by confusion and uncertainty, but eventually, former South Bend, Indiana Mayor Pete Buttigieg was declared the winner, securing an early victory in the heated presidential race. On February 4th, the State of the Union address took a back seat to the ongoing impeachment proceedings against President Trump. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's act of tearing up a copy of his speech during the last few seconds of the address symbolized the deep divisions in the country. The following day, on February 5th, the Senate acquitted President Trump of charges of abusing his power and obstructing Congress. It marked the end of a bitter impeachment trial that had gripped the nation for weeks. On the same day, the world bid farewell to legendary actor Kirk Douglas, who passed away at the age of 103. He left behind a legacy that I'm sure will be remembered for generations. February 7th saw President Trump's retaliation against those who had testified against him during the impeachment trial. He fired EU Ambassador Gordon Sondland and National Security Council Advisor Lieutenant Colonel Alexander Vindman, causing further controversy and raising concerns about retribution. On February 9th, the Oscars witnessed an unexpected upset when the film Parasite won 4 Academy Awards, including the coveted Best Picture award. It marked an historic moment for international cinema and left audiences in awe of the groundbreaking film. The political landscape continued to shift in February on the 11th as Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders secured a victory in New Hampshire's Democratic primary, solidifying his position as the frontrunner in the presidential race. Then, on February 17th, the Boy Scouts of America sought bankruptcy protection in the face of a new wave of child harm claims, highlighting a dark chapter in the organization's history. Amidst these events, the world was also grappling with the COVID-19 pandemic. On February 20th, more than 300 Americans were evacuated from the quarantined Diamond Princess cruise ship in Japan, with 14 testing positive for the coronavirus. The outbreak had already begun to take its toll on the world. On February 22nd, Bernie Sanders continued his momentum by winning the Nevada presidential caucuses, further cementing his position as a formidable candidate. Tragedy struck again on February 23rd when Ahmaud Arbery, a black man, was fatally shot while jogging in Georgia by a white father and son. The incident sparked outrage and led to their eventual arrest and charges on felony murder and aggravated assault. Sadly, this wouldn't happen for another 2.5 months. On February 25th, a major transition occurred in the corporate world as Bob Iger stepped down from his role as CEO at the Walt Disney Company after 15 years. Bob Chapek was named his successor, taking on the responsibility of leading the iconic company. The month concluded with significant developments in the presidential race. On February 29th, former Vice President Joe Biden scored a resounding victory in the South Carolina Democratic primary, reinvigorating his campaign and solidifying his position as a leading candidate. However, on the same day, tragedy struck on the healthcare front when the first COVID-19 death in the U.S. was reported. The nation would face even greater challenges in the coming months as the pandemic continued to spread worldwide. As February came to a close, the world reflected on the ups and downs of the year so far. Triumphs and tragedies intertwined, leaving a lasting impact on the course of history. Little did we know at the time that the events of 2020 were only the beginning of a tumultuous and transformative year that would shape the future in unimaginable ways. As March unfolded, the world seemed to be caught in a relentless whirlwind of triumphs and tragedies, victories and challenges. On March 1st, the political landscape shifted as Pete Buttigieg, who had won the Iowa caucuses, dropped out of the presidential race and endorsed Joe Biden. It was a strategic move that would have far-reaching consequences in the race for the Democratic nomination. 2 days later, on March 3rd, Joe Biden's campaign gained momentum with sweeping victories in 10 states on Super Tuesday, solidifying his position as a frontrunner. However, the race was far from over. On March 4th, former New York Mayor Michael Bloomberg dropped out of the presidential race and threw his support behind Joe Biden, further consolidating the moderate wing of the Democratic Party. The race took another turn on March 5th when Massachusetts Senator Elizabeth Warren decided to end her presidential campaign, leaving supporters divided as she chose not to endorse either remaining candidate, Biden or Bernie Sanders. As the political drama unfolded, the world was grappling with the opening shots of what would become a devastating pandemic. On March 9th, Italy placed itself on a nationwide quarantine to slow the spread of the coronavirus, causing economic concerns and a sharp fall in share prices, including a record plunge in the Dow Jones Industrial Average. The COVID-19 pandemic continued to escalate, with cases in the U.S. surpassing 1,000 by March 10th, and the World Health Organization declaring it a pandemic the following day. The outbreak had far-reaching consequences, affecting industries, sports, and daily life. Amidst the pandemic, justice was served on March 11th when movie mogul Harvey Weinstein was sentenced to 23 years in prison, making a significant moment in the Me Too movement. The pandemic's impact on the entertainment industry was evident when actor Tom Hanks and his wife Rita Wilson announced on March 11th that they had tested positive for the coronavirus. This news was followed by the suspension of major sports leagues and events, including the NBA, NHL, and Major League Soccer, as well as the cancellation of March Madness, the NCAA's basketball championship tournaments. The education system was also affected as school districts across the country announced their closures. Recognizing the severity of the situation, President Trump declared the coronavirus a national emergency on March 13th, paving the way for a coordinated response to the crisis. Meanwhile, the world continued to mourn the loss of lives due to violence and tragedy. On March 13th, Breonna Taylor was shot and killed in her home in Louisville, Kentucky. She was shot by police, serving a no-knock narcotics warrant, sparking outrage and calls for justice. As the pandemic spread, countries like Spain implemented nationwide lockdowns on March 14th to contain the virus. On March 15th, the Federal Reserve took significant measures by cutting its interest rate to 0% to address the economic impact of the pandemic. The financial markets reacted with panic on March 16th, as the Dow Jones Industrial Average experienced its largest single-day drop ever amidst the coronavirus outbreak. By March 17th, the pandemic had reached all 50 states, with West Virginia confirming its first case of COVID-19. The impact of the pandemic on daily life was further evident on March 19th when Governor Gavin Newsom announced extraordinary measures at the time, directing all Californians to stay at home. On March 24th, the world faced more disappointments when the 2020 Summer Olympics in Tokyo were suspended until 2021, and British Prime Minister Boris Johnson tested positive for the coronavirus. As March came to an end, the U.S. surpassed 1,000 deaths due to COVID-19, and the country's economy suffered a significant blow, with a record 3.28 million Americans filing for unemployment benefits in the previous week. Of course, amidst the challenges, there were moments of unity and action. The House and Senate passed a $2 trillion coronavirus relief and stimulus bill on March 27th, providing much-needed support to those affected by the pandemic. As the world looked forward to the uncertain future, it recognized that the year 2020 was going to be unlike any other. As we moved from March to April, the COVID-19 pandemic had spread like wildfire, leaving no corner of the world untouched. As April arrived, the situation seemed to only worsen, with each passing day bringing new challenges and uncertainties. On April 2nd, the world reached a grim milestone, as the number of coronavirus cases worldwide surpassed 1 million. In the United States, the economic toll of the pandemic was evident as more than 6.6 million workers filed for unemployment, plunging the nation into an unprecedented crisis. In response to the escalating pandemic, the CDC recommended on April 3rd that everyone consider wearing a cloth or face mask in public to help slow the spread of the virus. Amidst the chaos, President Trump publicly touted hydroxychloroquine as a potential treatment for COVID-19 on April 4th, urging people to consider its use, asking, "What do you have to lose?"
drug called chloroquine, and some people would add to it hydroxychloroquine. So chloroquine or hydroxychloroquine. Now this is a common malaria drug. It's also a drug used for strong arthritis. Somebody has pretty serious arthritis. Also uses this in a somewhat different form. But it is known as a malaria drug, and it's been around for a long time, and it's very powerful. But the nice part is it's been around for a long time. So we know that if things don't go as planned, it's not going to kill anybody. When you go with a brand new drug, you don't know that that's going to happen. You have to see, and you have to go long test. But this has been used in different forms, very powerful drug in different forms. And it's shown very encouraging, very, very encouraging early results. And we're going to be able to make that drug available almost immediately. And that's where the FDA has been so great. They've gone through the approval process. It's been approved. And they did it. They took it down from many, many months to immediate. So we're going to be able to make that drug available.
The controversial drug became a subject of debate and further added to the uncertainty surrounding the pandemic. The situation took a personal turn on April 6th when British Prime Minister Boris Johnson was actually hospitalized with COVID-19, highlighting the reality that the virus could affect even the most prominent world leaders. As the pandemic continued to wreak havoc, the U.S. presidential race took a significant turn on April 8th when Bernie Sanders dropped out, clearing the way for Joe Biden to win the Democratic nomination. The political landscape was further impacted by the ongoing crisis. Tragedy struck again on April 10th when the United States became the first country to report 2,000 coronavirus deaths in a single day, pushing the nation further into grief and despair. On April 11th, the U.S. surpassed Italy in having the highest number of reported COVID-19 deaths, crossing the devastating milestone of 20,000 deaths. The entire nation faced an unprecedented crisis as all 50 states received federal major disaster declarations for the first time in history. As the world struggled to grapple with the pandemic's economic impact, the IRS began sending stimulus checks to Americans on April 13th, providing some relief to those affected by the economic downturn. Amongst the ongoing crisis, President Trump announced on April 14th that he would suspend U.S. funding for the World Health Organization, adding further tensions to the global response to the pandemic. The Trump administration issued guidelines for a phased reopening of schools and businesses on April 16th, attempting to chart a path towards some semblance of normalcy amid the crisis. However, the economic toll of the pandemic was evident as nearly 22 million Americans filed for unemployment in a single month, marking the worst unemployment crisis since the Great Depression. The debate over reopening the economy intensified on April 17th when Texas became the first state to begin easing pandemic restrictions, with differing opinions on how to balance public health and economic needs. The pandemic continued to take its toll on April 24th when the U.S. death toll from COVID-19 surpassed 50,000, a grim reminder of the magnitude of the crisis. On April 27th, the U.S. surpassed 1 million coronavirus cases, with worldwide cases topping 3 million. The pandemic seemed to know no bounds, affecting every continent and every country. As the month drew to a close, tensions rose on April 30th when armed protesters stormed the state capitol in Lansing, Michigan, demanding an end to the pandemic lockdown measures. The protest highlighted the growing frustration and division within the nation as it grappled with the ongoing crisis. The world in April 2020 was a world in turmoil, facing a pandemic that had disrupted lives, shattered economies, and tested the strength and resilience of societies. As the months progressed, the world was grappling with a pandemic that had disrupted lives and economies across the globe. But amidst the chaos, another urgent issue demanded attention: the fight against racial injustice. May was a month of awakening, with events that sparked protest and conversations about systemic racism and inequality. On May 1st, there was a glimmer of hope in the battle against COVID-19 as the FDA authorized emergency use of the drug remdesivir to treat the sickest coronavirus patients. It was a small step forward in the ongoing fight against the deadly virus that had claimed so many lives. However, on May 3rd, the United States faced an unexpected and unusual threat: the invasion of murder hornets that posed a danger to domestic bees. While the world was already reeling from the pandemic, this new ecological concern added to the uncertainty and fear. The month brought both moments of justice and moments of outrage. On May 7th, the Justice Department dropped charges against former National Security Advisor Michael Flynn, raising questions about the rule of law and accountability. On the same day, there was a ray of hope when charges were filed against Gregory and Travis McMichael for the murder of Ahmaud Arbery in Georgia, a case that had sparked nationwide outrage over racial violence. The economic toll of the pandemic became glaringly evident on May 8th, when U.S. unemployment rate reached a staggering 14.7%, with over 33 million jobless claims filed since mid-March. The financial hardship added to the frustration and unrest that was simmering across the nation. Amidst the challenges, on May 15th, the Trump administration announced Operation Warp Speed, a public-private partnership aimed at speeding up the development of a COVID-19 vaccine, offering hope for a future beyond the pandemic.
We're here to discuss a monumental national achievement. From the instant the coronavirus invaded our shores, we raced into action to develop a safe and effective vaccine at breakneck speed. We're just days away from authorization from the FDA, at which point we will immediately begin mass distribution. As a result of this unprecedented investment, we are exceedingly proud that both Pfizer and Moderna have announced that their vaccines are approximately 95% effective. Despite the grim projections from the media 8 months ago, we did something that nobody thought was possible. They said it will never happen, you could never do it, it was a pipe dream. In just a few minutes, I'll sign an executive order to ensure that American citizens have first priority to receive American vaccines. We will soon end the pandemic and we will save millions and millions of lives.
But as the U.S. surpassed 1.5 million confirmed COVID-19 cases and 90,000 deaths, the fight against the virus remained a pressing concern. On May 21st, the fight for justice gained momentum when William Bryan, the man who had filmed Ahmaud Arbery's death, was also charged with murder, emphasizing the importance of accountability for all involved in cases of racial violence. The month also saw developments in the college admissions scandal, as on May 22nd, Lori Loughlin and Massimo Nulli pled guilty, facing the consequences of their actions. However, amidst all these events, it was the killing of George Floyd on May 25th that sparked a global awakening. Floyd's death at the hands of police officers ignited protests in the United States and beyond, shining a spotlight on the deep-rooted systemic racism and inequalities that had plagued societies for generations. From Paris to Nairobi to Rio de Janeiro, people took to the streets to protest Floyd's death and to highlight their own country's racial injustices. The world watched as protests ignited a long overdue national conversation about racism and inequality and highlighted those who had no interest in that conversation. On May 26th, even social media platforms joined the conversation when Twitter labeled a tweet from President Trump as misleading and included a fact-check link. The move signified a growing awareness of the responsibility that social media platforms had in curbing misinformation and promoting truthful information. As the protests intensified, a state of emergency was declared in Minneapolis, St. Paul on May 28th, And fired Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin was charged with third-degree murder and manslaughter in George Floyd's killing. The charges against 3 other fired officers were also filed, marking a significant step towards accountability. May 30th brought even more unrest as curfews were declared in Los Angeles, Philadelphia, and Atlanta due to ongoing riots and protests, with the civil unrest being termed the worst since the 1968 King assassination riots. Throughout May, the world witnessed the power of collective voices coming together to demand change. The fight against racial injustice became a global challenge, with people from all walks of life standing united for a better future. As the month drew to a close, the world knew that the journey towards justice and equality would be a long one, but it was a journey that could no longer be ignored. The voice of change had been unleashed, and the world would never, ever be the same again. The summer of 2020 was a time of great upheaval and transformation for the United States. The nation was grappling with not only a global pandemic, but also widespread protests against racial injustice. As June began, the country found itself at a crossroads, with events that would shape the future in profound ways. On June 1st, President Trump threatened to deploy U.S. troops to quell protests across the country. These threats sent shockwaves throughout the nation.
My fellow Americans, my first and highest duty as president is to defend our great country and the American people. I swore an oath to uphold the laws of our nation, and that is exactly what I will do. All Americans were rightly sickened and revolted by the brutal death of George Floyd. My administration is fully committed that for George and his family, justice will be served. He will not have died in vain. But we cannot allow the righteous cries of peaceful protesters to be drowned out by an angry mob. The biggest victims of the rioting are peace-loving citizens in our poorest communities. And as their president, I will fight to keep them safe. I will fight to protect you. I am your president of law and order and an ally of all peaceful protesters. But in recent days, our nation has been gripped by professional anarchists, violent mobs, arsonists, looters, criminals, rioters, Antifa, and others. A number of state and local governments have failed to take necessary action to safeguard their residents. Innocent people have been savagely beaten, like the young man in Dallas, Texas, who was left dying on the street, or the woman in upstate New York viciously attacked by dangerous thugs. Small business owners have seen their dreams utterly destroyed. New York's finest have been hit in the face with bricks. Brave nurses who have battled the virus are afraid to leave their homes. A police precinct has been overrun. Here in the nation's capital, the Lincoln Memorial and the World War II Memorial have been vandalized. One of our most historic churches was set ablaze. A federal officer in California, an African-American enforcement hero, was shot and killed. These are not acts of peaceful protest. These are acts of domestic terror. The destruction of innocent life and the spilling of innocent blood is an offense to humanity and a crime against God. America needs creation, not destruction. Cooperation, not contempt. Security, not anarchy. Healing, not hatred. Justice, not chaos. This is our mission, and we will succeed. 100%, we will succeed. Our country always wins. That is why I am taking immediate presidential action to stop the violence and restore security and safety in America. I am mobilizing all available federal resources, civilian and military, to stop the rioting and looting, to end the destruction and arson, and to protect the rights of law-abiding Americans, including your Second Amendment rights.
Tensions escalated when federal officers forcefully cleared peaceful protesters using tear gas from Lafayette Square, allowing the president to stage a controversial photo op at St. John's Episcopal Church. The images of this action sparked outrage and further fueled the protest.
Press, let's go. Press, let's go. Come on. Guys, we gotta go.
We have a great country. That's my thoughts. This country and the world. Great. It won't take long. It's not going to take long. You see what's going on. It's coming back. It's coming back strong. It'll be greater.
Amidst the turmoil, Washington, D.C. Mayor Muriel Bowser took a significant step towards recognizing the Black Lives Matter movement by designating a section of 16th Street Northwest as Black Lives Matter Plaza. The move served as a symbolic gesture of support for the protesters who were demanding racial justice. Sports also found itself entangled in the currents of change. On June 5th, the NBA voted to restart its season in a bubble setting in Orlando, Florida. The decision came amidst a nationwide call for social justice and raised questions about the role of athletes in advocating for change. In Seattle, protesters declared an autonomous zone in the city's Capitol Hill area on June 8th, highlighting the ongoing demand for police reform and social justice. The summer was also marked by the continued impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. On June 10th, the number of confirmed COVID-19 cases in the U.S. exceeded 2 million, underscoring the need for continued vigilance in the fight against the virus. On the same day, the FDA withdrew emergency use authorization for hydroxychloroquine to treat hospitalized COVID-19 patients, citing potential risks associated with the drug. June 15th brought a significant victory for LGBTQ rights as the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which prohibits employment discrimination based on sex, also covers sexual orientation. The decision was hailed as a major step towards equality and inclusivity. As the summer progressed, the nation grappled with its past and its symbols. On June 22nd, Major League Baseball clubs voted to start the 2020 season after players rejected the latest compensation offer, demonstrating the challenges of navigating sports in the midst of societal upheaval. But it was on June 30th that the nation witnessed a profound moment of change. Following a vote by the state legislature, Mississippi Governor Tate Reeves signed a bill that retired the official state flag, which was the last in the country that incorporated the Confederate battle flag in its design. The move was a significant step towards acknowledging the painful history of racial inequality and removing divisive symbols from public spaces. As June came to a close, the United States was facing a pivotal moment in its history. The confluence of a global pandemic, protests for racial justice, and a nation grappling with its past challenged the country to confront its flaws and aspire towards a more inclusive and equitable future. It was the start of a summer of change. As July started, the nation was still in the throes of the COVID-19 pandemic, but there were also other challenges that demanded attention and action. On July 1st, California Governor Gavin Newsom ordered tougher restrictions on indoor activities for most of the state as COVID-19 cases continued to rise. The pandemic's impact was felt all the way across the country, and state leaders were faced with difficult decisions to protect public health amidst the pandemic. Another troubling case came to light on July 2nd when the FBI arrested Ghislaine Maxwell on charges related to her association with the late financier Jeffrey Epstein. The arrest brought renewed attention to a case that had shocked the nation and raised questions about justice and accountability. On July 8th, the Supreme Court made a significant ruling, rejecting claims of presidential immunity and ruling that President Trump must release his financial records to prosecutors in New York. The decision was seen at the time as a victory for transparency and accountability in the highest office of the land. Sports were also impacted by the pandemic, as both the Big Ten and Pac-12 football conferences announced on July 9th and 10th that they would play only conference games in the fall. This was in an effort to prioritize player safety amid the ongoing health crisis. The pandemic also prompted unprecedented actions, as California officials announced on July 10th that up to 8,000 prisoners would be released ahead of schedule to help stop the spread of COVID-19 inside of state prisons. On the same day, President Trump commuted the 40-month sentence of his political advisor, Roger Stone, leading to further controversy and debate. On July 14th, the Trump administration ordered hospitals to bypass the CDC and send all COVID-19 patient information to a central database in Washington, raising concerns about transparency and data handling during the pandemic. In a surprising cyber event, on July 15th, Twitter accounts of prominent political figures, CEOs, and celebrities were hacked to promote a Bitcoin scam, highlighting the vulnerabilities of even high-profile individuals to cyber attacks. The same day, Georgia Governor Brian Kemp voided all of the state's local face mask mandates, adding to the debate over public health measures during the pandemic. On July 17th, Secretary of Defense Mark Esper issued a memo banning the display of the Confederate flag, reflecting the ongoing conversation about symbols of racial injustice in the country. Protests continued to be a part of the national conversation, as on July 18th, Oregon Attorney General Ellen Rosenblum filed a suit against the federal government, accusing it of unlawfully detaining protesters in Portland, adding to the tensions between the federal authorities and protesters. Sports continued to be not immune to the impact of the pandemic, as a coronavirus outbreak among the Miami Marlins led to the cancellation and postponement of several games across Major League Baseball. Throughout the summer, the nation also witnessed political tensions, as President Trump suggested on July 30th that the 2020 presidential election be delayed, citing concerns about increased voting by mail and the potential for fraud. The suggestion was met with widespread criticism and raised questions about the democratic process. Amidst all the challenges and struggles, the NBA season resumed in the bubble in Orlando on July 30th, providing a moment of excitement and relief for many sports fans. July was a time of testing and turmoil for the United States. With the ongoing pandemic, protests, and political tensions pushing the nation to confront its vulnerabilities and divisions, the country was left grappling with these challenges, uncertain of what the future would bring. From wildfires to political conventions, from racial protests to celebrity deaths, August brought a mix of tragedy, controversy, and activism. The month began with firefighters battling the apple fire that spread across 20,000 acres in Cherry Valley and surrounding areas of Riverside and San Bernardino counties, destroying homes and prompting evacuations. The ferocity of the blaze served as a warning of the challenging season ahead. In August, the Sturgis Motorcycle Rally in South Dakota attracted over 400,000 people, mostly without face masks or social distancing, raising concerns about potential COVID-19 outbreaks. Amidst the pandemic, Joe Biden made an historic announcement on August 11th selecting Kamala Harris as his vice presidential running mate, the first woman of color on a major party's presidential ticket.
All right.
Hi. Sorry to keep you.
That's all right. You ready to go to work?
Oh my God. I'm so ready to go to work.
However, the sports world was impacted by the pandemic as the Pac-12 and Big Ten conferences canceled all fall sports, while the ACC and SEC planned to play football. The decision brought both disappointment and controversy. On August 13th, the U.S. Postal Service announced plans to remove hundreds of high-volume mail processing machines, fueling concerns about mail-in voting ahead of the presidential election. The state of California faced its own crisis in August, with hundreds of wildfires triggered by thunderstorms and a record-breaking heat wave. The SCU Lightning Complex fires and the August Complex fire became some of the largest wildfires in California history. As wildfires raged, the country was engulfed in political debates. Speaker Nancy Pelosi summoned House members back to Washington to pass a bill aimed at protecting mail-in voting amidst concerns that President Trump was trying to cripple the Postal Service for his own benefit. The Democratic National Convention was staged virtually this year in Milwaukee from August 17th to the 20th, formally nominating Joe Biden and Kamala Harris as the Democratic presidential ticket for the 2020 election. Amidst the political events, Apple became the first U.S. company to be valued at over $2 trillion, highlighting the tech industry's continued growth during the pandemic. Controversy erupted on April 20th when former Trump advisor Stephen Bannon was arrested and charged with fraud over a private fundraising campaign to build a border wall. Protests broke out in Kenosha, Wisconsin on August 23rd, following the shooting of Jacob Blake by a police officer. The incident sparked nationwide protest and prompted professional athletes to boycott their sports in protest. The summer also saw a tragic loss of actor Chadwick Boseman, who died at age 43 after a private battle with colon cancer. His passing sent shockwaves through the entertainment industry and beyond. As September arrived, the country faced a season of turmoil and uncertainty. On September 1st, family members and activists demanded transparency and justice in the shooting of Dijon Keys, a black man, by the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department. The incident further fueled the ongoing national conversation about racial injustice and police brutality. Amidst the turmoil, wildfires broke out in Oregon on September 7th, driven by severe drought and strong winds. Over 1 million acres of land were consumed by the flames, leaving thousands of homes destroyed and taking the lives of at least 10 people. The magnitude of the disaster prompted an exodus of more than 500,000 people fleeing the wildfires, accounting for more than 10% of the state's population. Tragedy struck again on September 18th as the nation mourned the loss of Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, a pioneering advocate for women's rights and a liberal icon. Her death left a vacancy on the highest court in the land, sparking a contentious battle over her replacement. As the nation grappled with the wildfires and the loss of a judicial giant, the COVID-19 pandemic continued to wreak havoc. On September 20th, the nationwide death toll reached a grim milestone of 200,000. The presidential election added to the political tension, as on September 23rd, President Trump refused to commit to a peaceful transfer of power if he were to lose the election. The refusal raised concerns about the democratic process and the potential for a contested election. The same day, a Kentucky grand jury brought no charges against Louisville police officers who were involved in the killing of Breonna Taylor during the drug raid that had gone wrong. The decision sparked protests and reignited the call for justice and police reform. As the presidential campaign continued, President Trump unveiled his Platinum Plan on September 25th, outlining socio-economic initiatives aimed at African Americans, including making Juneteenth a federal holiday and addressing racial issues. However, the campaign event would later be linked to a cluster of COVID-19 cases among its attendees. On September 26th, President Trump announced Judge Amy Coney Barrett as his Supreme Court nominee, igniting a contentious confirmation process. Meanwhile, A bombshell report by the New York Times revealed decades worth of President Trump's personal and tax returns. Many years he paid only $750, raising questions about his financial dealings and tax payments. Amidst the political dramas, sports provided a brief respite as the Tampa Bay Lightning won the Stanley Cup on September 28th, marking the conclusion of a season that had been disrupted by the pandemic. However, even the presidential debate on September 29th was marked by shouting, insults, and misinformation, overshadowing the substantive policy discussions and leaving the nation further divided. As September drew to a close, the United States found itself at a critical juncture, grappling with multiple crises and facing a momentous presidential election. The events of the season had tested the nation's strength and unity, leaving it to confront its challenges and determine its path forward. As October unfolded, the United States continued to grapple with the challenges of the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic, while other events added to the nation's struggles. On October 1st, a White House coronavirus outbreak was announced, with President Trump and First Lady Melania Trump testing positive for COVID-19. The news sent shockwaves through the nation and raised concerns about the potential impact of the government's functioning. The situation escalated on October 2nd when President Trump was rushed to Walter Reed National Military Medical Center for treatment. The president's hospitalization raised questions about his health and further highlighted the seriousness of the virus. After 3 days at Walter Reed, President Trump returned to the White House on October 5th, still recovering from COVID-19. His return was closely watched, with many wondering how his illness might affect his actions and decisions. As the nation dealt with the pandemic, it also mourned the loss of Eddie Van Halen, the legendary guitarist, on October 6th. His death at age 65 marked the end of an era in the music world. Meanwhile, on October 8th, the FBI announced a disturbing plot to kidnap Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer. 13 men were charged in connection with the plot, revealing the extent of domestic threats and extremism in the country. Sports offered a brief respite from the turbulent events as the Lakers defeated the Miami Heat on October 11th to capture their 17th NBA title, tying the record for the most championships won by a team. However, even the sports achievements were overshadowed by other events. On October 12th, Facebook took a significant step by banning content relating to Holocaust denial, a move aimed at combating misinformation and hate speech. Protests erupted in Portland on the same day, as activists toppled statues of former presidents Theodore Roosevelt and Abraham Lincoln. The protests were sparked by historical grievances and a desire to bring attention to the treatment of Native Americans. As October progressed, the COVID-19 pandemic continued to take a toll. On October 16th, the United States surpassed 8 million confirmed cases, highlighting the scale of the public health crisis. In the business world, Quibi, a streaming service, launched just 6 months before to much fanfare, announced on October 21st that it was shutting down. The closure underscored the challenges of breaking into the competitive streaming market. In the political arena, Amy Coney Barrett was confirmed as a Supreme Court Associate Justice on October 26th in a party-line vote that added to the polarization in the country. The Supreme Court's subsequent ruling on mail-in ballots in Wisconsin further raised concerns about the upcoming election. Tragedy struck again on October 26th when Walter Wallace Jr. was shot and killed by 2 Philadelphia police officers. The incident sparked protests and riots, adding to the tensions over racial justice and police conduct. The month ended with sobering statistics about the pandemic. A Stanford University study linked more than 30,000 COVID-19 cases and 700 deaths to President Trump's campaign rallies. The U.S. surpassed 100,000 daily cases for the first time, and nationwide cases surpassed 9 million. As the election loomed, the nation was faced with the realities of a public health crisis, political divisions, and social unrest. The events of October highlighted the challenges and struggles that the United States will continue to face as it navigated into an uncertain future. As November dawned, the United States found itself deeply divided and embroiled in the aftermath of a contentious presidential campaign. On November 3rd, millions of Americans turned out to vote, leading to a record-breaking 66.7% voter turnout. However, the results were not immediately clear, and President Trump, that very night, prematurely claimed his victory. This just added to the uncertainty. With millions of mail-in votes still being counted, no news organizations were able to declare a winner on Election Day. The nation was on edge as the days passed waiting for the final results. Finally, on November 7th, major news organizations declared Joe Biden the winner after securing enough electoral college votes.
Today, Les Holt and Savannah Guthrie in New York, the moment the entire country has been waiting for after a very close race. NBC News now projects that Joe Biden has won the Keystone State, Pennsylvania, and its 20 electoral votes.
And that means we can now project that former Vice President Joe Biden has been elected President of the United States. He is President-elect Joseph Robinette Biden at 77 years old. Chuck, we'll turn to you. This map is a real interesting one, not necessarily the path that anyone thought would have unfolded, but here we are.
This is a Fox News special report.
Can now project that former Vice President Joe Biden will win Pennsylvania and Nevada, putting him over the 270 electoral votes he needs to become the 46th president of the United States.
Donald Trump, the 45th president of the United States, has vowed not to concede at this point. Legal challenges will ensue over the course of Monday and beyond. We will see what happens.
Keep it here on these stations.
After 4 long, tense days, we've reached a historic moment in this election. We can now project the winner of the presidential race. CNN projects Joseph R. Biden Jr. is elected the 46th president of the United States, winning the White House and denying President Trump a second term. We're able to make this projection because CNN projects Biden wins Pennsylvania. The former vice president in his third run for the highest office, pulling off a rare defeat of a sitting commander-in-chief. With this victory, Kamala Harris is set to become the first woman and the first person of color to be the vice president. Again, CNN projects Joe Biden will become the 46th president of the United States. And Jake, he is now President-elect Joe Biden.
Okay, we have an announcement to make. Joe Biden is President-elect of the United States. Biden is being called with the Pennsylvania votes that have just come in. Biden has been elected, Mika, and tell us about him.
Well, the president-elect of the United States, Joe Biden, has run for president 3 times, and the third time has turned out to be the charm. Not only the charm, but possibly the most consequential election of our lifetimes. He is 77 years old. He was born in Scranton, Pennsylvania, but calls Wilmington, Delaware, his home. At the age of 29, Joe Biden became one of the youngest people ever elected to the U.S. Senate, and that is where he stayed for decades. Even, quite frankly, through tremendous tragedy that has struck his life. He has been witness and a part of some major moments in American history during his time as Vice President of the United States under Barack Obama, and that is the passage of the Affordable Care Act, and health care remains his top priority.
However, President Trump refused to concede, challenging the results in court and alleging widespread election fraud. His legal efforts and recount demands proved futile, and on December 14th, the Electoral College officially elected Joe Biden as the president-elect. The contentious election and Trump's refusal to accept defeat led to questions about the country's democratic processes. The situation also raised concerns about the potential impact on foreign relations as other nations watched closely. Meanwhile, the COVID-19 pandemic continued to wreak havoc on the country. On November 4th, the U.S. became the first country to exceed 100,000 daily cases. Health officials sounded the alarm, urging dire actions to curb the spread of the virus. Amidst the election drama and the pandemic, the nation mourned the loss of beloved Jeopardy host Alex Trebek, who passed away on November 8th. The virus also affected the political sphere as HUD Secretary Ben Carson tested positive for COVID-19. However, there was a glimmer of hope on November 9th when Pfizer announced that its coronavirus vaccine candidate showed promising results, with early data suggesting 90% effectiveness. Moderna followed suit with a similar announcement about its vaccine's efficacy. Despite the mounting evidence and the escalating COVID-19 crisis, President Trump continued to challenge the election results. His actions sparked protests and raised concerns about the democratic process. President Trump continued to challenge the election results. His actions sparked protests and raised concerns about the democratic process. Finally, on November 23rd, after a 2-week standoff, General Services Administration head Emily Murphy allowed President-elect Biden's team access to federal resources for the formal transition process. However, even as the transition began, President Trump pardoned Michael Flynn, further fueling controversy. As November drew to a close, the nation grappled with the pandemic's devastating toll, political uncertainty, and the aftermath of a fiercely contested election. The challenges ahead remained significant, and the country faced critical decisions about its future. As the tumultuous year of 2020 came to a close, the world braced for a fresh start. On December 1st, Attorney General William Barr made a significant announcement stating that the U.S. Justice Department had found no evidence of widespread voter fraud that could alter the outcome of the 2020 election. Despite this declaration, some protests against COVID-19 safety rules continued, with certain businesses and parents rallying for their causes. Amidst the ongoing pandemic, Britain led the way in the vaccination efforts, becoming the first Western country to inoculate its residents against COVID-19 on December 8th. The United States soon followed, with the FDA authorizing the emergency use of Pfizer and BioNTech's COVID-19 vaccine on December 11th. However, the political landscape remained tense as the Supreme Court rejected a highly unusual lawsuit filed by Texas, attempting to overturn President-elect Joe Biden's victory in several key states. On December 14th, the Electoral College confirmed Joe Biden's victory, solidifying his position as the next president of the United States. Meanwhile, the pandemic's toll continued to rise. More than 317,000 people in the U.S. had lost their lives to COVID-19 by December 20th, and the international death toll reached a staggering 1.69 million. As the year drew to a close, President Trump began issuing a new round of pardons, sparking further controversy. A whites-only church in Murdoch, Minnesota received a permit, raising concerns about racial tensions. On December 28th, new travel restrictions were imposed due to the highly transmissible COVID-19 B.1.1.7 variant circulating in the UK. And the second COVID Relief Act was signed into law, aiming to provide much-needed support to individuals and businesses affected by the pandemic. In the midst of these developments, the Department of Justice announced no charges against the 2 Cleveland police officers involved in the tragic death of Tamir Rice. As December 31st marked the 1-year anniversary of the first reported case of COVID-19 to the World Health Organization, the nation reflected on the challenges and progress made in combating the pandemic. While the distribution of the vaccines had begun, the pace fell far short of the ambitious goals that were set. As the clock struck midnight on New Year's Eve, the nation held onto hope and resolve. The year 2020 had been a roller coaster of emotions, but it had also highlighted the resilience and strength of the American people. As 2021 began, the nation was determined to move forward. But could we do so united in the pursuit of a better and healthier future?